Hello, my name is Galina Ignatenko. I'm a PhD fellow in art history at Aarhus University, Denmark. And today I'm going to talk about humorous embroidery as a form of speech, especially when complex maternal feelings are treated as morally inappropriate. Motherhood is shaped by intense social expectation. Both behavior and emotional responses are subject to scrutiny. The idea that motherhood is pure happiness is reinforced not only through language, but also through everyday images and craft practices. Most embroidery patterns and kits you can buy present childbirth and motherhood as calm, joyful, and full of gentle anticipation. In contrast, the lived experience of motherhood, beginning with pregnancy, is often deeply ambivalent and containing both positive and negative aspects. During early motherhood, especially during maternity leave, many women find themselves socially isolated and their experience often remain unrecognized or dismissed. Researchers describe that as a kind of voicelessness. Maternal exhaustion and frustration are difficult to express openly because they are quickly interpreted as signs of personal weakness. As a result, maternal experience is either reduced to a single acceptable narrative or silenced altogether. Women face real pressure and exhaustion, yet lack of legitimate way to articulate it and be heard. Accordingly, the central research question is how does humor enable the articulation of maternal experience in circumstances where literal language is socially constrained? This research focuses on contemporary embroidery practices that actively circulate online, particularly on Instagram, Pinterest, Etsy, and Facebook, and Reddit. These works are built around short, sharp textual formulas executed in traditional embroidery technique and intended for display, both in domestic interiors or in digital space. The visual simplicity, repetition of phrases, and explicit tone allow them to articulate shared experience of everyday life in a very recognizable way. The material is analyzed using an Anagarin methodological framework, which combines iconological analysis with the tools from humor studies. It involves a step-by-step consideration of the visual, rhetorical, and contextual aspect of each work. Looking at the material, we will see several themes that repeatedly organize the humor, including lack of sleep, chronic tiredness, endless cleaning, the repetitive nature of domestic labor, and a critique of the idealized image of a happy mother. The first example comes from the moment of pregnancy. The text is centered and each line is short, giving the composition a rhythmic, almost poetic structure. We can read, "Pregnancy is the happiest reason for feeling like shit." Next to the next, we see a figure of a pregnant blonde woman with a small heart, the symbol of the baby, and the overall appearance is entirely conventional, resembling embroidery commonly available in retail settings. And then, at the very end, we encounter the word shit. It disrupts the tone of the entire composition, cutting through its softness and exposing the tension the image tries to smooth over. Several layers of incongruity operate here. First, the embroidery technique itself adds a historical layer. As Rosika Parker shows in her Subversive stitch, embroidery has long been associated with ideals of femininity, patience, neatness, domestic virtue, and this cultural association remain readable even today. And pregnancy is commonly presented as the happiest time, wrapped in constant positivity. Pop culture circulates the image of the glowing pregnant woman, and against this stand the lived experience many women go through. It can be nausea, swelling, pain, heartburn, insomnia, hormonal fluctuations, and chronic fatigue. And the phrase "feeling like shit" is a deliberately sharp, lowered register for naming this discomfort. As Sarah Ahmed argues in The Promise of Happiness, women are addressed through a happiness script in which family, home and child and motherhood are presented as source of happiness by definition. Once these goals are achieved, the mother is expected to be grateful, calm, and emotionally available. Anger and fatigue are rarely recognized as signs of structural overload. Instead, they are often read as signs of personal inadequacy. And we can see the next case, go the fuck to sleep. Here we see an embroidery with a text, and this is a very popular pattern. I have seen many different variations of this work, but almost all of them follow the aesthetic of traditional children's motif. Some bunnies, bottles, pastel colors, a typical bedtime look. And the phrase directly references Adam Mansbach's book, Go the Fuck to Sleep, and this is a parody of classic bedtime stories. Already in the literary source, the comic effect is built on the clash between a gentle tone and a sense of parental despair. Here, the same tension is translated into embroidery. The soft, childlike aesthetic comes into direct conflict with obscene language. Rough, lowered vocabulary appearing on a surface traditionally associated with care and decoration, and it creates an additional layer of incongruity, and the comic effect is intensified through the collision between a historically loaded medium and the sharp, profane text. Another layer appears in a variation of this work, this decorative pillow that you can see, with the phrase "wake the baby and I'll cut you." Here, an aggressive formula is applied to an object functionally connected to sleep and comfort. Decorative pillows are typically associated with softness and home warmth. They are not expected to carry threats. And the comic effect arises from the contrast between the decorative form and the message. The phrase "I'll cut you" is clearly not meant literally. The exaggerated tone makes that obvious. But the statement still breaks the norm. But it is precisely the tension between the threatening and the safe that makes it funny. At the same time, the mother's frustration is clearly visible here. Anyone who has spent hours trying to put a baby to sleep knows how fragile that moment is. The smallest noise can wake the child and trigger a new cycle of calming. The time invested in the work reflects the intensity of the feeling behind it. You can imagine that someone may have spent many hours, perhaps even weeks, stitching this sentence. And this brings us to something important about embroidery as a practice. Embroidery is not just a surface that carries text. It's a time-based process through which the text gradually takes form. The phrase is not spoken once and finished. It accompanies the woman through the work, and returning in the pauses between care task and daily routine, slowly materializing in the fabric. A key feature in this practice is that it allows interruption, and this resonates with Lisa Bereitzer's argument that maternal experience is structured through constant interruption and breaks, and embroidery does not resist this as a practice. It fits into it, and you can set easily the work aside, make a few stitches, and return to it later without damaging the result. This makes embroidery especially compatible with maternal time, a time structured by these constant breaks and competing demands. The repeated movement of piercing the fabric with a needle can also be understood as a controlled and socially acceptable release of tension, and the aggression is not eliminated, it is redirected into the material. And through this process, the joke is always there. The subversive phrase is being slowly formed, stitch by stitch, in the middle of ordinary domestic routine. And this is something quietly rebellious about that, a small act of naughtiness held in the mind while the hands are busy with care. In this way, the act of stitching becomes both a craft practice and a bodily way of bearing and transforming frustration. The next example addresses domestic labor more directly. The full text reads, "My housekeeping style is best described as, there appears to have been a struggle." The second part borrows the tone of an official report, cold, detached, as if describing a crime scene. The joke treats the mess as evidence of a long, exhausting effort, as if the room has been through a fight. And similar formulas appears across many other works. Fuck the dishes, dishes we meet again, you dirty bastard, I just fucking cleaned that, housework is a bummer, excuse the mess, I'm a shitty housewife, etc, etc, etc. In these examples, dishes and disorder are addressed directly, if they were enemies. The language includes swearing, profanity, and insult. And the structure follows a logic of confrontation. The everyday object is cast off a target, something to fight back against. And humor emerges from this exaggerated hostility redirected at things rather than people as a way of releasing this frustration that needs somewhere to go. Embroidery also offers something that housework never does, a sense of completion. A finished piece stays finished. The dishes will need washing again tomorrow, and the result is erased, almost as soon as it appears. Embroidery accumulates stitch by stitch, and the finished object remains. In this way, it gives fleeting experience some lasting forms. The next example is an embroidery pattern you can easily buy on Etsy, and the biblical tone of "thou shalt not" gives the statement an ironic authority, as if maternal patients were elevated to the level of commandment. The ornament and composition maintain a familiar domestic format. Against this backdrop, the phrase functions as warning. It conveys the sense of someone constantly being tested. It conveys constant provocation and ongoing boundary testing. Other example is in Russian, and it is one of many, and these embroideries appear across different languages, suggesting that this humor and the frustration behind it are not specific to one cultural context. As in the phrase "I don't have 100 hands," this pattern speaks directly to a feeling many mothers know, the endless simultaneous requests, questions, and demands. Next to the text, there is an embroidered middle finger, small lightning bolts, and as a symbol of tension, almost like sparks of anger, and at the same time, decorative flowers that seems out of place, almost mocking the message. This everyday labor is largely invisible despite its significant influence on daily life. In research, this is often described as mental load, the ongoing management of family life. It includes remembering deadlines, doctor's appointments, school events and gifts, monitoring the family's emotional climate, anticipating problems, and, of course, smoothing over conflicts. Even when household tasks appear equally divided, this cognitive and emotional burden most often falls on the woman, and it tends to remain invisible precisely because it's not recognized as a separate task. Attempts to speak openly about this asymmetry often lead to tension or a conflict. When a woman expresses fatigue or overload, it may be interpreted as an accusation or refusal to meet social expectation. As a result, many women turn to various coping strategies, downplaying their own feelings, using humor or self-irony, or trying to manage everything in a superwoman mode. And here is the last case. This embroidery was created as a part of the Domestic Duster project. It was created by British researcher and artist Vanessa Marr. This is a collaborative project in which women stitch personal statements on yellow cleaning cloth and creating a shared archive of domestic life. And some of these works are humorous. For example, this one, with the title Call of Duty, references the well-known military video game and the idea of heroic obligation. But here the meaning of duty shifts entirely. It is no longer about military service, it has become about domestic responsibility, and household tasks are represented as a game controller, requiring constant attention and perfect coordination. Like a player, a woman must handle multiple tasks at once, using her hands, her body, her mind, and her emotions, of course. And the embroidery becomes a metaphor for this constant switching between different modes of care, cleanliness, and control. And the lives of a housewife appears as an endless game, but without pause, without a clear ending, and without the possibility to save progress or exit. It can be noted that within a collective setting, especially when women work together in person, they often allow themselves bolder and harsher formulation than they would when working alone. This brings us to the concept of the collaborative floor, which Jennifer Quotes uses to describe women's conversational humor. Humor in this context usually does not depend on a single sharp punchline. Instead, it builds gradually. One person says something, someone else picks it up, adds to it, adjusts it, and the joke becomes stronger together rather than being delivered by one speaker. In the case of humorous embroidery, this logic operates not only in offline collective making, but also through online circulation. When works are published on social media, they create a shared space of humorous expression and support. Reposts, variation, and comments transform an individual statement into a collective form of recognition, turning private frustration into shared experience. These embroideries function not as singular art objects, but as flexible formulas operating in a way similar to memes. In political contexts, humor can serve as a way to avoid external censorship. In the maternal context, it becomes a way to voice what is otherwise hard to articulate and to be heard. Thank you for your attention.